Hey everyone, it's 7:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, May 26, 2024 years from something, maybe. So today I'm going to actually look at one of the most amazing stories I've seen in a long time, and I come across a lot of incredulous stories. And there's a number of other people who have touched on this subject, but maybe not so specific as the Empire State Building and its construction, specifically, amongst other buildings. I will tell you that, for instance, Lucius Aurelian has done, I don't know, at least one video on these 1920s, 1930s Art Deco Gilded Age buildings. And it is true that the greatest majority of these, beyond fantastic, is what they are. They're beyond fantastic structures. Just about all said to be built in the 1920s and 30s. Fuzzy years, that I call them, because there's a lot of strange things that seem to happen, and the world, not just the American world, but the world, seems to have been born out of this time. The world as we know it. The world. With the only vestiges of what existed before being in mostly story form, that you have to just take their word for it, pretty much. So, what I did was, after I had realized the incredulous nature of the story of the construction, I did some looking, and I found, for one thing, this 22-minute video that's supposed to be restored into color, supposedly video of the Empire State Building being constructed. I also found this book by, I believe it's Craig Dougherty, and I don't remember his wife's name. I think it's a husband and wife that wrote this. One of few books I could find on the Empire State Building that wasn't written by a woman in like kids book form. You know, because a lot of women, they write the kids books for the kids, for the kiddies. It was the same with books like this, and not just like the Empire State Building, but anything that is suspiciously old world with hard to believe stories behind them, whether it's the construction of or any other factors they try to claim about said building, structure, city, thing, infrastructure. A lot of those books are actually, they're written by women, and oftentimes in such a format that you swear they're just writing for kids. They think you're a child, and they think you're stupid. So they write it for stupid children. This one's a little different, but not really. So anyways, the introduction of this, and we have a chronology in here, we may get to. We'll see. The introduction says, when the Empire State Building in New York City was completed in 1931, it was the tallest building in the world. It held that distinction for more than 40 years, until the first of the two World Trade Center towers was built in New York City in 1972. And we have a lot of impressive, but in my opinion, quite ugly skyscrapers that come up many decades after this apparent, supposed, purported, alleged boom in the 20s and 30s. Mostly like the 70s. Sears Tower, John Hancock, go over there in Chicago, my homeland, though I did grow up in Northwest Indiana. If you look at a map, it's basically just the state line that separates Northwest Indiana and all its industry from Chicago, an arbitrary line. So anyways, yeah, a lot of these, what some would call brutalist structures, certainly not beautiful like these, were built many decades after that boom. This boom happening, by the way, during the Great Depression, Prohibition, times of great upheaval, and government programs and all kinds of weirdness going on. He says, although it's no longer the world's tallest building, the Empire State remains one of the best-known architectural landmarks of all time. Its design and construction are testaments to the creativity and determination of the people that made the project a reality. The darkest days of the Great Depression, of course. In the 1930s came one of the greatest structures ever built by humans. And, I would agree it's a really great structure. The thing is, unfortunately, and the Chrysler Building and only a very few other buildings that are of this great immaculate beauty. They're not as tall as buildings like the Sears and the Hancock and World Trade Centers, other monstrosities that they've erected in more recent times. Let's say since I was born in 1974. And so many of these structures that are still in their own right, oh my gosh, they're not 120 some odd floors like these new ones. Well, maybe not. But there has been plenty of talk and more than talk about how useless a lot of the space is in some of those monstrosities. Makes you really wonder about the building of them. Makes you wonder about why those World Trade Center towers in Building 7 all had to come down when it did. Were they killing a bunch of birds with one stone by bringing them down? Maybe because they were kind of useless. Maybe because they weren't built too good and they kind of thought they were going to come down pretty soon anyways. So they could just take care of a number of things they wanted to accomplish all at once. So what I would like to do, instead of taking you through the grueling backstory of it mostly centers around John Jacob Rashkub, who was the vice president of GM, who was a power player, got involved with DuPont later, they say he was running the campaign of this Al Smith, who was the mayor, I believe mayor of New York City. And that's how they met. Those two guys formed a brain trust, and they got these other financial backers involved, and they decided, hey, you know what? We want to build us a great big building, and decided to buy the property on the corner of 5th and I believe 5th and 33rd, was between 33rd and 34th Street, so I guess 5th, 33rd, where I guess it would have been the original Waldorf Astoria hotel stood, and we're going to get to that. And so it really, and this is breakneck speed, and that's why I'm at the chronology page. To give you an idea, first off, you have to, according to their story, you have to believe that no building had been built to this size. In fact, when they're planning it, we are to believe that the Chrysler Building was being built, because the Chrysler Building, another enormously impressive skyscraper of New York City, they say was also built in a very, very, very short time. Anyways, so to give you a sense of the chronology here, I'm on the chronology page. And they say in 1929, August of 1929, the funding was arranged with this mysterious trust of phantom funders. In August 1928, also, Al Smith, that what they say was a former mayor of New York, announces the plan to build the Empire State Building. Now, do keep in mind that they had just arranged a lot of this with the architect firm that they said only came into existence. They say it was made up of 3 different architects from 3 different architectural companies who came together to form this partnership. And wouldn't you know it, they're not even in business a year. And these guys, along with their invisible backers, they want them to design the biggest building in the world, of course. So they say in September 1929, a deadline of May 1, 1931, May Day, set as completion date for the project. Shreve Lamb is hired as the architects. What? Wait a minute. You can't do that. You have to already have them hired and figure all this stuff out before you're like, we're going to build a tall building. Oh, Really, have you talked to some architects and engineers and stuff about that tall building? No, but we're just sure we're going to be able to do it for sure. We're going to find some good ones, and they're going to design it. And apparently, they would be so talented that they could have it all designed, all squared away. And they would be very confident of this within less than a year. They say September 29, the ESB Corporation rents space in a nearby office building. Oh no! Then a month later, the stock market crashes. But that didn't rain on their parade. They were just going to go ahead, no problem. No setbacks. Oh, the stock market crashed. Everything's going kaput. It's fine. We'll still build the biggest building in the world that's never been tried before. So it says November, the ESB Corp announces that the building will be 85 stories. They say they changed their mind. Yeah, oh no, it's fine. It's fine. All the architects got to do when they change their mind about that is they get out their old little rule and they just add more floors to the building and stuff. It's no big deal. So they say in 1930 January, demolition of the Waldorf Astoria completed. Now this is the crazy part. Other sources absolutely, without question, tell you that construction, like literally the project, let's say the project, began in January of 1930. And then they say in January of 1930, the demolition of the Waldorf Astoria completed. So we have a real hard time pinning down exactly when the demolition of the Waldorf Astoria was started, but we don't really have a window outside of January 1930. So really kind of in that month. So the way that things get super weird about this is, well, look, so officially they say in March 17, the first structural steel was set in place. So keep that in mind, March 17, 1930. And of course, they're saying the demolition was complete in January of 1930. So the interesting thing is, I think I'm going to actually just start, because we really need to start at the Waldorf Astoria. So this is supposed to be here, a picture of it, not long before it was demolished. And the things to keep in mind about the Waldorf Astoria, it was not like kind of a little building or anything. It was supposedly made up of two different buildings, the Waldorf and the Astoria, who decided to become partners at a certain point. But like the Wikipedia says about the Waldorf Astoria, constructed in the German Renaissance style by Henry Janeway Hardenberg, it stood 225 feet high, with 15 public rooms, 450 guest rooms, and a further 100 rooms allocated to servants. Now that's the Waldorf. That's the Waldorf. The thing is, so when we put those two, so it's just a behemoth. It's such a huge, massive place. 225 feet high. 225 feet high. So it had somewhere in the neighborhood of about 18 floors or so. But the thing is, when they combined it, so what we were looking at here, you would basically Waldorf and Astoria together. So when they combine it, something like connected by the 300 meters, how about we get feet there, buddy, 980 feet long corridor known as Peacock Alley. After the merger in 1897, the hotel had 1,300 bedrooms, making it the largest hotel in the world at the time. So then we get some kind of story about, and really, based on when they said they built it, the two, the Astoria following the Waldorf, maybe what, like a year later? So we're to believe that those stood for, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 decades or so. This magnificent structure right here. And when I say magnificent, I mean utterly magnificent. We aren't even getting close-up shots here. Not just magnificent in detail, but in size. In size. So large. It's, about 350 feet along the one street and about 200 feet along the other would be about its basic footprint. 225 feet high. It's got to be somewhere in the realm of 18 stories. And you look up here to essentially the capital of the building. So like a Roman column, you got your base, you got your shaft, you got your capital or hat up here on the top. You can see all of these amazing windows and rooms and little balconies. I mean, there is so much detail and variegated detail in this. All of these gigantic columns along this, and I'm not sure if this is the Fifth Avenue side. Immensely beautiful and just plain immense. And the stories get fuzzy, because I promise you there are sources that claim that the demolition didn't even start till January. And then they claim it ended in January. Now, there's some that say, well, they'll get around it by, for instance, the Wikipedia and other official sources saying, well, the demolition after they sold it, the demolition started. And you know why they say they sold it? Well, it just wasn't popular no more. People they were moved on to newfangled things. And this beyond gorgeous building on the outside, and I can only imagine what it looked like on the inside. I can only begin to imagine what it looked like on the inside. Just wasn't popular anymore. They couldn't sustain it. People were on to new and better things, like jazz. So, some accounts say that they began the demolition shortly after it was sold, so basically mid 1929 or so, they say. But again, it's really hard to pin them down. It's like a lot of other questionable accounts. They will say things like, when I was looking into dams, and I haven't stopped, I just took a little hiatus, I would find so many of these brilliant dams, very big, not just the dam structure itself, as far as like the powerhouse and maybe the main spillways and things like that, but the earthen portion of it, huge, of course. And they will say something like, well, it was built in, or no, they'll get around that. They'll say such and such dam completed in 1929. Completed. They won't even tell you when it started. They won't give you specifics. They can't really get into logistics and details, because then you can start picking apart the story. Now, here's the real strange part about this. So what had to come down for the ESB to go up? The Waldorf Astoria, which we already looked into the dimensions, and they say that meant 2,000 tons of iron, 13,000 tons of steel, and tons of other material had to be taken apart and removed from the site. And you can bet on that. Tons of other material. Limestone, marble, other stones I can't even imagine. All of the probably well-installed lath and plaster throughout all of the rooms. All kinds of hardwood decorations, marquetry. I can't even begin to list all of the things that they would have to deal with. All of course, the windows and the way that a lot of these things, interior and exterior, are constructed. They would take a certain degree of time and care to deconstruct it all. Now, the strange thing about this whole story, too, is this. Much of the hotel's demolition was done by special workers who were referred to as the morticians of the building trade. The most respected of these workers were called barmen, because they worked with crowbars, tearing apart the building by hand. And now, as a matter of fact, if you get into the official story, watch some documentaries, read some other books, they will tell you that is exactly how this entire structure was dismantled. By hand, by many workers that we don't really have any sort of documentation for whatsoever, and all using just crowbars. Which, of course, is really amazing, because if, for instance, they had that many tons of steel and iron, but steel, they're dealing with all kinds of structural members that are riveted together. And last time I checked, you're not going to have any luck with rivets if you're using a crowbar. And of course, they have to embellish this a little bit like, boy, they had to be smart, because, if they did it wrong, a floor could collapse or a ceiling could collapse or something. Yeah, well, that's true, but I don't even know how much luck a bunch of guys with crowbars would have taken apart a well-built house, much less the Waldorf Astoria. And they'll come along and they'll say, oh, well, they had some sledgehammers, smart guy, okay? They had some sledgehammers. But there's not just that. There's the dismantling of the frame that had to be steel and or iron, and moving all of those members to the ground. Were they going to just randomly let them fall willy-nilly? This would be a project that would require a great deal of precise planning. And they said that they actually reused a number of these materials. They said what materials they couldn't reuse, they took out to like 15 miles off the shore of, I think it's Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and just dumped in the ocean, of course. Well, just dumped in the ocean. We're not sure exactly where. Maybe they floated away. I don't know. They also said that this hotel was so full of antiques, it's just unimaginable. And I wonder how long it took for them to move all of those out, if those were part of the purchase or not. But on to the Empire State Building. So if you go by their story, they definitely admit that by mid-March of 1930, they're starting construction. Now, we're talking about down in the footers. They've got to, according to how they said they built it, and I don't know of anyone independent that has been in there to verify this. I'm not sure if I have a lot of reason to say that's not true, but I do know that skyscrapers this tall, they tend to have to be, when they build skyscrapers, even this tall today, they are going to use either very long piles in the sense that they're not just going and sitting on the bedrock. They have to essentially drill into that bedrock some distance and put piles in. You can also, essentially, you can lay a very thick footing or foundation for the entire footprint of the building, which they say is an option. I don't know of too many that would rise that high where that would be the case. Again, though, you'd have to be for sure down to bedrock, and you'd want to tie that in, I would think, with steel to the rock. And again, this isn't something they say they did, but most tall buildings today use combinations of the two. Those long pilings down into the rock, and oftentimes that very thick, again, absolutely supported, so much rebar you wouldn't even believe it, footer to hold this tall building in place and level, because the last thing you want is a building that's 1,400 feet up in the air to tip even a little, even a tiny, teeny, weeny little bit. But we'll see from the video that they have published how they say they did the foundations. Now, this book goes through mostly just like the basic kids' stories of it, but what we have to believe is that they began building at the foundation in mid-March of 1930, and that they finished it by mid-March 1931. And of course, they have to claim that essentially they were building 4 floors a week. And we're talking about the whole thing, not just the steel framing and this really special and interesting terracotta floor plan where they say that they put in these long, essentially they were sort of like, I hate to call them beams. They were various shaped members that they had designed of terracotta that they said fit together in sort of a puzzle style. If you think of like the way that an arch is done with brick, block, stone, with your keystone in the middle, and the way that that holds it very strong, it was very similar how they say they did that between the girders, the steel girders. And then they say they poured concrete on top of that. So there's all that to just the construction of it. And that's, of course, not to mention all of the limestone they had to put on the outside of the building. And it's beautiful limestone, by the way. A lot of it has very nice dimensional designs in the limestone all the way up to the observation deck today, as well as, I believe, types of granite that has been cut that sit beneath a lot of the windows. So the design elements are even hard to go through and list in one video if you want to get to other things besides just the amazing design elements. And that's actually just the design elements that they let us know about, because so much of the building, it is a highly secured building. And about the only portions that they allow people to go in, they're very touristy portions. So you're not ever going to get to look at the whole thing as they say it existed when they say it was completed in mid-March 1931. So keep those things in mind. And one thing I'd love to do, because I do have this video queued up, is go through some of these images in this book. And there are other images, but not a ton. And, you know, you can decide if you really want to believe that these are actual images of the construction of the Empire State Building and that actually happened between essentially March 1930 and March 1931, you go right ahead. But I'm going to point some things out about these that seem pretty darn strange to me, okay? One thing I want you to keep in mind as we look through these pictures is the size and scale that studios, even back at this time, Hollywood studios, were willing to build for various production, even silent movie productions, like maybe the first Ben-Hur, first 10 Commandments. They were massive, utterly huge, massive. And they do admit that they had very large-scale models that existed of the Empire State Building, even when it was being built. They say things like, yeah, we used this big 7-foot model, actually, to shoot scenes for the movie King Kong. So since I'm not aware of any of these photos that I've looked at being pulled from the film footage that they've made, we're going to have to treat them maybe like they are two different things. So you look at this photo and you say, well, what is it? I mean, do we know for sure that that is someone inside the Empire State Building? And they brought up one of those cameras. You remember that the cameras are supposed to be real big and clunky, not only film cameras, but photographic film cameras. And they just hauled them up all over the place. Some of the angles that we get, you kind of wonder, well, where was the person at that was supposedly taking these pictures? Now, I don't know exactly where this guy is supposed to be and why we see there is this lattice work of steel right here instead of a vertical beam, or why it seems like we have these horizontal members going away at least a 45-degree angle from what appears to be this girder down here, or why we have all of this wood that looks like it's just as rotten and beat up as can be running wild, way out in the air, running wild. And they've got to be high up because it looks like they're higher up than the Chrysler building. So we'd have to imagine that they were in the Capitol portion of this building. But you look at all this wood running wild out here, and then check this out. We have something like a plate or a gusset that seems to be just hanging in air. Oh, was it somehow fastened to this wood? If it was, what was the reason for that? Because it's, you know, they would, well, it was there for something, I guess, and maybe this other beam of wood is just obscuring why it was there. sitting up in the air all by itself like that. But again, I've seen so many pictures where it would seem that they're running these planks of wood, just individual planks of wood, way out, I mean, with nothing underneath. And I'm expected to believe that guys are walking on those. And the thing is, if you've worked construction like I have for a long time, and you get up even on a walk plank that is 20 feet in the air, supported by a couple of ladders and ladder jacks, you can feel how unsteady that is. And when you consider all the stories they've been telling about the high winds up at this height, even the idea that someone would go walking out on this, especially untethered, which all of these guys appear to be. None of them have any fall harnesses on at any point in time. We're supposed to believe they were like the world's greatest fearless daredevil acrobats who were building this thing, as opposed to poor, uneducated slave class people. So, we don't really have a context to say for sure whether this is building or whether this is just some props, with a photograph of part of the New York skyline, even though the Chrysler building looks to be detached from all of the other buildings around it. It looks very fuzzy and hazy, and the thing is, I have seen a lot of photographs and films taken for real from the tops of some of these buildings, and this lack of clarity is absolutely unacceptable. Oh, well, they just couldn't, the cameras weren't so good back then. Well, I beg to differ, because I've seen some immensely clear, sweeping, long shots from back then. And I don't buy that. Sorry. So it, certainly to me, it looks like they easily could have put an image behind simply an actor on a set piece who was no more than a few feet off the ground. You see him, he's kind of hanging there right towards the edge, 1,000+ foot drop off. He doesn't mind. He's wearing his ripped up bibs today. No big deal. They won't trip me up or anything. 1,000 feet in the air, giving the thumbs down to somebody below him, which I assume is probably somebody who works for the studio, standing about 10 feet below him, asking him if he wanted potato salad for lunch. And he's like, nah, no potato salad. I'll take the deviled eggs. Thank you very much. So we'll try a few other pictures here. Again, just ridiculous. The things you have to believe about men. You have to believe, well, they have no safety gear on. They are on this what looks like steel framing, 1,000 feet in the air, because the only framing members that I could imagine would be rounded like this would be up in the Capitol. So we're 1,000 feet in the air. No, they're up 1,000 feet in the air with those high winds and everything. They're just hanging out here. This guy's straddling. This guy's just sitting there with his foot. And, well, okay, he's a little more safe than this guy, who doesn't look like he's too right in the head to begin with. No harnesses, not tied off, no safety, high winds. I guess they don't have families to feed. I guess if they fall off this building and die, it won't affect anyone. That's good. Oh, well, good for them. So again, if we look at this, it's not hard to believe that we're looking at a photograph, a stock photograph of, and we do not know how many photographs this regime had, photographs taken from the once likely very prolific amount of dirigibles there likely were, because when you look at some of these Art Deco buildings that I believe do still exist from the old world, you will see a lot of capitals on them that appear to be, if not a dirigible docking station, something perhaps similar to that. And they do admit that somebody had the crazy idea of making that Capitol at the top of the Empire State Building a dirigible docking port, but the winds were too high, and they couldn't pull it off. The winds were too high. Well, the funny thing is, if you check other cities in the world, they have the same kind of Capitol on them as that. So it appears a lot of people had the same idea. All of them really, really bad ideas, I guess. So again, we've got a picture here that's entirely out of context. And by the way, this vertical steel beam we have here, It does not look actually like the Carnegie beam that we see described in the film. Now, what they say that they used for all the heavy lifting on this project were guy derricks, were essentially the early form of a crane. It was essentially built out of steel with these. Well, we had a mast. You would have a vertical mast here, and then you would have a boom out here that would do the lifting. It would swing around 360 degrees and all ran by cables. The thing is, they would have to be secured down to whatever platform they were on very, very, very well, especially if they're lifting beams like this, which beams like this were said to be essentially, they said that they weighed a ton every linear foot. So you got to figure, what if that's 30 feet or so, 30 tons? And so we're talking about a crane that really has to be able to handle a whole lot of weight. And the problem, of course, you're going to see with these, besides for this picture being completely out of context, we have no idea what's really going on here, is the fact that they keep showing us, well, here it was when they were putting in the foundation, then here it was after 12 stories, and then here it was after 50 stories. Every time we've got these guy derricks up there doing the work, but we have no idea how the guy derricks got up there. And the funny thing is, like today, we have tower cranes that are used to build buildings. Tower cranes are brilliant, brilliant pieces of machinery and engineering. And even those, oftentimes, to build them in the first place, you need cranes to build the tower cranes. So I would love to know how exactly they were getting these cranes up story to story to story to story and still working at such a breakneck speed as they said they worked. All right, so again, is this to the left, is this two construction workers that are sitting here on a girder hundreds of feet up in the air over the city? Or are these two guys on a set with a superimposed city background in the back? It's amazing just how blurry and undefined so many of these backgrounds. Now, there are people that take photos and film of New York, Chicago, other big cities from the tallest skyscrapers, even on hazy days, and the city doesn't look that hazy. Same thing with this. This photo, hazy, hazy, hazy in the background, and nice and sharp and clear in the foreground. And now this one, this is highly suspicious because, so for instance, in order to do the steel construction like it was done on the Empire State Building, you would have to connect, so all of these, we'll see this in the film footage, all of these beams would have been milled, like all the holes for all the rivets, before it was shipped in Pittsburgh, before it was shipped out to site here in Manhattan. And they would have to lower these beams into place and line up these holes, and then they would have to put in the rivets. And the riveting process would consist of pretty much 4 people. The first guy would heat the rivet red hot. They say he would toss it to the catcher, the guy with the bucket. And they actually claim that these guys who would heat up these red-hot rivets, that they would grab them with 3-foot-long tongs and toss them 50 to 75 feet vertically with 3-foot tongs accurately. That they would toss them like that accurately. And they try to make an excuse for how incredulous that sounds by saying, well, you can throw something vertically farther than you can throw it horizontally. No, you can't. Not if you put a good arch in it horizontally. That's not true. But anyways, so it would be tossed to the catcher, and then the catcher, well, let's say this, the bucker up. He would have to, again, with tongs, pull that thing out of the bucket and put it in. Sometimes he'd have to place it and then pound it in a little bit. And then he would have to hold it with a tool that was kind of sort of looked similar to the riveter. And the riveter would be using basically an air jackhammer. And this jackhammer would essentially put that mushroom head on the other side of the rivet, which is why it had to be so hot so that he could work it flat like that. The problem is, of course, in this picture that we got the bucker up, he's on one rivet, and the riveter, he's on another rivet. So that's not going to work out too well if that was actually reality, because we can see him up there. They posed for another picture, and this time the bucker up got it right. He got it right that time. Good for him. Now, of course, we do have various pictures that we're supposed to believe are the building and construction. Of course, the guy derricks always look very odd and suspicious in these. In fact, I think there's one scene in that film where one of the guy derricks, at least the boom on it, looks like it's transparent. Hopefully I can find that as we go. Now, this is one of few photos that they claim was an interior of the Empire State Building as it was being formed. And I guess we're supposed to believe that this, below this little guy here having his old lunch, that these are supposed to be those terracotta, essentially like boards or beams that would go between the horizontal steel members, the girders. And then after this, we get some more crazy pictures. Now, this is the funny thing. Again, we have this background that is extraordinarily blurry as opposed to the foreground. But this is one of the photos that I find to be remarkably incredulous. The caption of it says, "Some workers put themselves in great danger while on the project. This man is scaling a cable high above the city with no safety equipment." And we don't see anybody with any safety equipment because we have to believe that they were completely willing to put their lives at risk at all times. And that only, depending on what story you believe, only 5 or a dozen men died, but they can't really agree on that, as per usual. The problem, of course, I have with this, besides this guy looking like he just came from a deodorant commercial, is the fact that we're supposed to believe he's scaling on this cable. This cable's got to be about an inch diameter. And the problem that I have with this is he's going along clamping this other cable to it, which that'd be damned heavy. The problem, besides how superhuman this feat would have to be, because this cable, look at it, it's not even all that taut. It's really not that taut at all. So pretty quick, he'd find himself on the underside of that cable, for one thing. The other thing is, cables are made up of a lot of small wire strands. And about any cable out there, even if it's just the slightest little bit, these strands can and do get little breaks in them here and there. They can, and they do. And we're talking about steel, and they can have, just if they're dragged around, or if some other surface, steel surface, grinds on them, puts pressure on them, they can all of a sudden develop not only hard and sharp surfaces, but a strand of that wire that this cable is composed of can break or fray, and then what you essentially have is a spear tip that could just impale you. And I'm telling you, if you've never been impaled by a small steel wire, oh, it hurts. It really hurts. And this guy is out there, no gloves. Check out steel workers in recent times, all of them with very heavy gloves, because of things like that, for one. No gloves, no sleeves even. He's in bibs, and he's in oversized bibs. I think he's in oversized bibs because the wardrobe had given the bibs to this guy, who's kind of a big guy over here on the right. And then it was time for his scene, and they're like, "We're all out of smaller bibs, man. You're going to have to wear these. Just, do your job. Come on." So in oversized bibs, he's scaling this wire. We're supposed to believe that he can actually keep himself on the upper side of this wire without going bloop and falling down beneath it, and that he's pulling this extraordinarily heavy wire up here and clamping it as he goes. Sure thing. Now, I'm not sure if there's too many other interesting pictures like that in here. There really isn't. And then we get to the finished building, of course, from there to there. So here's the real interesting part. This is the stunning footage of the construction of New York Empire State's Building. They've taken various old clips, and they've put them all together And they colorized them, and they said they did some digital corrections. Needed a little bit of correction, so they applied that too. We'll just start where they say the first column is set April 8th, 1930, and they say the curb reached April 25th. That's 3 stories underground. They say they reached. Now remember, they didn't even start on the foundation until March, and they say they're already setting those initial steel beams, which were a lot different than all of the beams that followed them. They do have a portion in this video of this guy showing the way that they were constructed along with animations. Now, something I'd like you to notice just from this is supposed to be a sweeping shot of them laying in these. Well, essentially, these are supposed to be a special kind of footer that they used, where they would, I have to assume, because I don't know, nobody's talked about this yet, I have to assume that somehow they tied in concrete pads to the bedrock. They say the bedrock's only 30-something feet down from the curb or street level. So we don't really know how exactly they did that. I would think that would take quite a lot of time and work. You'd want to put in vertical rebar at least, as well as horizontal rebar, and tie that all together. It's a long process and necessary too, but we don't know anything about that. And then they would put these steel, they're part of the footer on top of these pads. And then I believe they would pour concrete all around these, and then those initial foundation beams, these super heavy ones, the ones that weighed like a ton per linear foot, they would be set on this and erected, and then they would put the girders between, and you would have that, essentially that first level. But I want you to pay attention to how absolutely horrific this job site looks. This is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. You could not hope for men to be even remotely safe having to try to navigate with new equipment, by the way, because here's the thing. Those guy derricks that we're seeing in a lot of photographs and film, they say that they had to build those guy derricks that size and in that way, and that the contractor, his name was Sterrett, they said that he said they had to build all this equipment special just to be able to do this job. So we're to believe that multiple guy derricks all over this site are working with all of this shit everywhere. Men having to run around and place all of these enormously heavy steel, I guess essentially they would be some sort of a shoe connector piece encased in concrete. I guess that's the way they would essentially reinforce it, with connectors on this top plate. Placing all of them as they went correctly, and we'll see a scene where it looks, you think, there's no way they could hope to place that thing nice and level on that pad with how terrible the debris situation looks all around. You can't have a foundation that looks like this. You're not going to find any that look like this. They level out and grade this whole area. You want a construction site, you want a building to go in an orderly and efficient way. This whole place has to be graded out. You can't leave it like this is just shit. And it literally looks like there's a mountain up here, and that the pads that they're going to be placing all of these, essentially like a reinforced foot on, these up here are higher than these down here. So we're not going to have any actual grade. I mean, you'd have to have all of these at perfect height, the level. You'd have to go around with some kind of leveling instrument. Like today, they would use essentially a story pole and a laser finder. But back then, we'll say whatever it was that they were using, and make sure all of these are absolutely perfect at the same level, because if they machined those initial beams in the first place to all be exactly the same, every single one of these, footers, because I guess they're trying to tell us that these were all just on these individual footing pads, and they essentially put in steel piers that it's all sitting on. They would all have to be perfectly level. And if you're making them all perfectly level, well, then the whole site is going to be graded perfect. You want this to go quickly and efficiently, and there's no way it can with all of this garbage just everywhere. And there's no way. This is not even whatsoever. There's no way this can happen because they can't machine all of those vertical beams exact at the mills if they don't know exactly how long they have to be. They all have to be exactly the same. That's the way that this works. That's supposed to be the beauty of it all. And all of this looks so uneven. It's a shit show is what it is. It is a total shit show. You will not see a serious construction site that looks this entirely screwed in reality. This is a movie set. This is moron time. And I don't know what this was. It's a freaking movie set is what it is. This isn't a construction site. This is not a serious construction site of one of the most magnificent buildings in the world. This is a stupid ass movie set is what this is. So they got a few other, now here, this is the real interesting thing. They do this twice. Now this is for one of the footers that they're supposedly lifting off the truck here. And, what they're supposedly doing is taking it delivery from the street, and then one of these derricks is supposedly lifting it up and over and into the foundations, which went down 30-something feet below curb. But the weird thing is, and we see this a couple of times, they don't show us, if the camera's up on a perch, it can track this piece right here from the street into this hole for the foundation. But does it? Watch. I'll make this full screen. Here we go. Here we go. We're going to pass the curb pretty soon, and then we can see. Oh, no, we got to cut. We got to cut to one of the derricks supposedly hauling the same piece, which doesn't quite look the same. We got to cut. That's unfortunate. I thought we would get a full, just to show us this is for real. This is really happening. But unfortunately, we get a cut. And this is what I was talking about right here. So supposedly, they are placing this on, I would assume, some sort of a pad that they had prepared for it. And again, remember this, folks. All of these would have to be at a perfect level of height, so that all of these components would work together. They would not only have to be at a perfect height, but would have to be seated on these pads if it were pads, which I would have to assume. And I would further assume the best thing would be for these pads to be at the top of piles that were dug into the bedrock, but again, we know nothing about that. But the problem is, all of this debris that we're seeing everywhere, like all this stones and everything, how do we know with all this debris everywhere, and this is when we get into the efficiency of this, that they're not going to, let's say that the derrick operator just accidentally hits a little bit of this when this is going down, a little bit of these stones or whatever, and they roll right down in here and get under one of these beams that make up this whole foot right here. Then it's out of level. It's not going to be at that perfect height you need it to be at. This whole operation has to be more precision than you can imagine. And we're supposed to believe that it's being performed on a site that's this messy. I have problems with that. So as you can see, this is what it was supposed to look like here, encased in concrete. And then these connectors right there above. So let's just take another look at the street view. Because now they're supposedly hauling a Carnegie beam, which would be one of those foundation beams, set on top of this. There it is, out in the street, supposedly being lifted by one of those original guy derricks they had to build for this whole job. It's going to be going past the curb, and of course, this time for sure he's going to pan down. Oh, nope, he lets us see the people. which is actually different because in the scene before, they were just walking around minding their own business. They didn't care. Well, now all of a sudden you got a crowd gathered because as part of the story, they said everybody stopped what they were doing looking for jobs because it's the Depression after all. They stopped what they were doing in all of their white hats that looks like they got from the wardrobe department, all the same, and they're watching what's going on. But I'm sure, of course, they're going to go back and show us a full pan from the street into this foundation area. Here we go. Yep, no, it's going to happen this time. Yes, that is definitely not some sort of a matte painting or photograph back behind us over here. Of course not. Here we go. They're going to show us. Oh, my goodness. Again, a cut. That's so unfortunate. We get a cut again. Darn it. So anyways, from here and this messy, messy, messy set, we go to the mills where they are supposedly drilling all of the holes that they would need in these wing plates to put on this foundation beam, this Carnegie beam, they call it. They would have to drill all of them super precise so that all of these fit together super precise, which is, again, why I said that all of those concrete pads had to be super precise as far as their height goes, because this was like an erector set, except far more precise. Everything had to fit together in a very, very specific way. But we are about to see some magic. We are about to witness in this film magical steel. Right here, I'm going to show you. And one thing I'd like to point out is how shiny their chains are. Look at that. I have never seen chains that shiny in any steel mill, any foundry, any situation like this. But boy, are those shiny. I mean, it's like they just came in on the truck. Look at that. Man, lucky guys with their shiny chains. So apparently they are setting the wing plate for this foundation beam, this vertical foundation beam. Now here's the part where things get funny. This is where steel behaves in a way that you would never expect steel to behave. If you look at this plate that they are about to lay down here on this beam, it's got to be 3 inches thick. It has got to be 2 feet wide. Gotta be. And we're going to say that it's probably, the thing is, probably only about 20 feet long-ish. But I want you to pay attention to the way that this steel plate, in this movie that they tell us, this is the guys over at the mill putting together these beams for the Empire State Building. I want you to see how this steel plate behaves on the shiny chains. Because they got shiny chains back here too. Anyways, you see it back there? Now, doth my eyes deceive me? Or is it actually flexing? This 3-inch thick, 2 foot wide, at least 20 foot long steel plate. Did I just see it flexing? There's not a chance I just saw it flexing. Let's see. Here we go. They're going to lower it into place so it's all nice and perfect. Whoa! Whoa! Listen. I don't want to have to draw a straight line on the screen here just to prove it to you folks. But that steel plate looks like it's all curving and flexing and stuff. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. And it's just bloop. It's just going right into place. Like rubber steel. Or maybe magical flubber steel. It's the Carnegie flubber steel beam. Wouldn't you like to use the flubber steel beam in your building? That's what I want. I want a building that acts like rubber. There's just not a chance. I'm even going to show you. Because when I saw that, I'm like, doth my eyes deceive me? Or is that really bending? And it shouldn't. So this is okay. So it's not exactly the same dimensions. It's 4 foot wide. But it looks like just about the same thickness. 3 inches. So I wonder if, oh, hey, look at this. By the way, those chains, not nearly as shiny as the other guys had. They're lucky. They got the shiny chains. So let's see if this flexes. It's not flexing out here at all. Boy, that looks really rigid. Really super rigid. Oh, how about here? Oh, did you see that? Look at that. Let me see if I can back that up. I can. Okay, watch this cable. This cable's actually lifting this so it can go through a roller. Now, this roller on this enormous, enormous press is putting, I don't even know how many, thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of pressure on this so that they can bend it. It has to apply ungodly amounts of pressure on this plate just to bend it. Now, they're lowering it down with this cable as it goes through this machine, because I'm imagining they want it to go through at a certain angle, and then they're allowing it to lower as it goes through these rollers. And let's see, once it lets go out here with all this hanging out, if it bends a little for us. Nope. Oh, nope, it's staying right up at the angle that it's coming off those rollers from. It's staying right up at that angle. It isn't bending at all. In fact, they have to apply, I don't even know how many pounds. People that know a lot more about the way that steel is bent and shaped. Oh, wait, do you think it's going to bend when it comes out? Look at all that plate that's hanging out of the rollers here. It's not bending. It's not bouncing. It's not moving. Look at that. Right up in the air, all proud. But apparently this one here, take a look. Watch it flex as the guy walks on it, and the shiny chains let it drop into place. Here it goes. Wait, no. There it goes. Yeah. Carnegie flubber steel, folks. It's magical. And then after that, we get some animations and explanations of the Carnegie beam and so on and so forth. And is the beam the guy pointing to different parts of? Is it a real steel beam? Is it a real Carnegie steel beam? Is it the real Carnegie steel beam that went into the Empire State Building? Did Carnegie even exist when this was built? I doubt it. But here we are back to the most atrocious looking job site I've ever seen. Bar none, hands down, nothing even comes close. And then they go back to just giving us some shots of the derrick. It's picking up stuff we don't get, again, from curb into the job site. Nope, we just get that interior. And then they start showing us some crazy things that I remember from some of Terry Gilliam's work. He was the animator for Monty Python. And he incorporated this into a few of his films, most notably being Brazil. These interesting ways they have of simply overlaying a lot of things on the front and showing more isolated action behind that. And that's assuming that they are using equipments and methods and things like that as antiquated as they say. And again, one way or another, I want you to look at how freaking nightmarish this site looks that these men are supposedly working on. It is a bona fide nightmare. A nightmare. And what am I supposed to believe? That this guy, Derek, is only attached by some bolts to a couple of beams right here? Is that what I'm supposed to believe? Jeez. Again, same thing. Do we know that that's a steel beam right there? That's hanging all crazy like that? And it's actually holding all crazy. See, because they would say that they had this method of standing it up, and they'd have to be very careful about it. This is tons of steel. It's going to kill somebody if it falls. And they've got everything all willy-nilly everywhere. A total mess. Same thing with this right here. We're supposed to believe that this is footage of them building the Empire State Building here. Again, things like this, it's not that hard to animate them in here. Oh, I found the transparent derrick. And I'm sorry, I know I don't have this blunt. Let me take it to full screen. The transparent derrick. Look at the boom on the derrick. Now, I think technically this would be the boom and not a jib, but I'm not a craniologist. However, let's just call it a boom for shits and giggles and take a look at the girder that is supposedly behind this boom. I want you to take a look at that because I can't really zoom this in much more, and I don't think the camera's going to zoom in much more, but you can clearly see that girder behind. No, it's not the lattice. You can see it just running through that girder right there. Or I'm sorry, the boom right there. You see it running right through? There should be steel, solid steel right there. Trick of the light, right? Is that a trick of the light? I don't think it is. And I will point out one more thing that I think is really funny. They claim that this was such an impressive operation, of course, because it would have to be, that there were people just lined up in droves on the streets and sidewalks just watching them do this work, which, again, I would think even across the street on the sidewalk would be a little bit dangerous when we consider how screwed up some of the things they say they were doing was. I mean, and you're telling me all kinds of materials weren't falling because of the hubris of these men, and you'll see. I'll include that clip in here, but the thing I think that is strange is we are supposed to be looking at a number of scenes as they're building up, and up of buildings that were essentially supposedly across the street from the construction site where they're building the Empire State Building. One thing I noticed that was strange is if droves of people, as they say, were gathered out on the street at all times of the day to watch them work, why we don't have all kinds of people in these windows just watching them work all day. You see almost no movement from any of these windows in any of these buildings ever. I think one time, maybe, and I can't even remember where it would be, I might have seen one person in one window somewhere. That's it. And then they're giving us the messy site again. So as you can see, these would be the foundation, because they just, for some reason, were at the 12th floor and then they cut back to the foundation. So these are supposed to be these Carnegie beams with their wing plates and everything set in, all ready to go. And again, all these pads would have to be perfect level with one another. All of them. Perfect, absolute perfect level on this messiest of messy job sites imaginable. And then we've got a few clips of them supposedly setting one of these. They don't actually show us from that one guy trying to manipulate it to it going in place. We're just hammering it in here. Again, they're just recycling these clips. And now they say on the whatever floor. And then this is supposed to be a pan up the building. And remember, they had models of these buildings, for one thing. And I believe this is all supposed to be like wooden built walk planks and stuff, which is just, it's beyond ridiculous. It really is. This thing was a big droop in the middle, because I definitely want to walk around on that. Big old droopy wooden walk planks. Sounds like a good time. Supposedly putting in there were these aluminum, decorative aluminum, essentially like plates that ran vertically up. I don't know if it was all of the building. I'm going to give you one that I think is kind of funny. This is supposed to be them working on it. Besides this, all right, here. This is supposed to be guys laying in brick at various portions of the building where there would be brickwork instead of the limestone and granite and other things. And first off, man, that is the mess of messes right there. Now, most bricks are going to be delivered on pallets neatly so that you can do your work quickly and in an organized fashion. This is not, just like the foundation being such an utter mess, this pile of rando bricks is just the worst thing I've ever seen. Now, these guys out here are supposedly supposed to be laying bricks. And if you've ever seen a real professional bricklayer, yeah, they're fast. They're fast. They get a brick on. They grab some mortar with their trowel. They butter that next one so fast and get another one on. And this would be, if this were really happening, it would almost be like a ballet between these guys handing the layers these bricks and then buttering these bricks and just getting one layer after the other after the other. It really is something when you're looking at real pros. But we look at something like this, and I want you to pay special attention to the supposed bricklayer in the bottom right of this scene. This guy right here. He's got no mortar on his trowel. Did you see that? Not at all. And he's acting like he does. He's acting like he's scooping up mortar onto the brick. He's doing nothing to the brick. Oh no, we're going to take a minute and just make sure that brick is perfect. There's not a chance. He was buttering up nothing. He had nothing on his trowel that any of us could see. And then here's another scene. This is supposed to be the four guys. So the heater, who would also be the tosser, I guess he would be over here. You got the catcher over here. And then this would be the bucker up. And on the other side, you would have the riveter. And I swear to God, you watch this and you're like, this basically looks like a bunch of actors and they're waiting. They're waiting for the director to tell them to go. Watch them. They keep looking. Is it time yet? Are we ready yet? Come on, let's go. There we go. Hey, he caught it this time. We don't have to cut and do this again. All right, so the bucker up supposedly putting that rivet in, pounding it in. Well, that really took some force to get that in. And then he's supposed to be holding it while the riveter... Where's the riveter? Where's the riveter? This guy over here, he's doing something else. He didn't realize he was supposed to be Where's the riveter? There's no riveter. All them, they're just all looking around like, are we doing this okay? Now, you see these two guys supposed to be putting up a girder, right? This guy's out here on some vertical beam. We don't know why. Climbing it like a ladder. And he's just looking around like, hey, is this good for the scene? Look good? Do I look like a sky boy? Can I get down now? Okay, thank you. It doesn't seem to represent actual work. And then they show us these really ridiculous things like the foreman, which I'm guessing, he look like he's dressed like a foreman. Even though all these guys, what they're wearing their suits to work. It was the Depression. It was the only clothes they had. And he's going to swing them out. What are they? At this point, they're at least 100 feet in the air, right? Based on the buildings around there, they'd have to be. We're going to swing them out in the air. Nah, they're not going to fall. We know it for sure. Are they tied off? No, probably not. Hey guys, something for the cameras. Let's give them something at home to look at while you're suspended at least 100 or more feet in the air. Enough feet in the air to where if you fell, you'd die. Let's give them something to see. Yeah, wave your hats at them. Only hold on with one hand because it's only your life, and of course that doesn't matter. And then after this, we basically just get footage of supposedly the finished Empire State Building. Or, they'll give us actually a couple of scenes that would appear to be, see, this is it, still in construction. We have no idea if this is a model whatsoever. They can do so much with miniatures and bigatures, washed out sky. We have no idea. Again, the derricks look really weird up there. Oh, look, they're patriotic. And then this is, of course, supposed to be a scene of them rising up from the city to show us the fullness of the Empire State Building. Apparently more scaffold or something set up here. Now, the funny thing, how do we know that up to there wasn't footage of the actual Empire State Building so it fit with all the buildings around it? But from this point here, right here is a perfect point to cut it off and just insert the model. The rest of the way up, even if they had to use models. If they had to use models. As opposed to something that they just designed artistically and inserted. The sky looks absolutely washed out. We have really no way of knowing And I think there's just one more scene kind of like that. Same sort of thing going on too. They're trying to show us that while the foundation and the shaft is in and they're just working on the capital, but it's the same kind of thing going on here. We have no for sure way, and based on the look of it, could easily be a model or literally just an artistic rendering inserted in front of a sky that they had captured. We have no way of knowing. And again, when you consider the fact that the official story behind how fast they said they built that was something that we can't witness today. There is a time lapse of a hospital that I think is in Wisconsin going up. Not nearly as big, not even the same footprint. It's smaller. And it took them to complete this hospital that's, I don't even think, 10 stories, over 2 years. And they have all the time-lapse footage of it, over 2 years. So just consider that and think about the fact that they were claiming not only are they building this greatest, one of the greatest of skyscrapers, at least in height, and so much about the detail in it that is beyond impressive. And they're saying that they're doing it not only in the midst of this depression, but at the same time as so many other beyond impressive structures are being built. So it's really something. I mean, I think there is plenty enough evidence for anyone to look at the claims and say, I really don't think that those claims could be verified, and I really don't think that they could ever hope to build something as grand and unbelievably beautiful and big as this, especially in the time frame they said they did it, with the economic state that they say the country was in, with the lack of records. They say there was 3,400 workers at its peak, but I will bet you anything they don't have any records of who that was. They claim that a lot of those skyboys were, in their words, Native Americans, and if they're talking about Indians, I didn't see one in any photo or footage, so that's weird too, isn't it? All kinds of claims that are unsubstantiatable. So that's all I wanted to do with this video, was to talk about the Empire State Building and how crazy a story it actually is. And that's just one building of so many in just North America, not the world, just North America, that they claim to have built in, again, this Art Deco style, which is just beautiful. And you have to wonder, well, why didn't you bring it back? It's just gorgeous, this style. Why didn't anybody bring it back? And I'm sure there's a million excuses they would use, as opposed to the most likely excuse is because if we brought that back, that Art Deco style, and tried to start building buildings again, like all of these, we would be exposed, because everyone would realize how we could never accomplish such things in anywhere near the kinds of time frames that we claim that we accomplished that in. So with that, I'll wrap it up and see you guys in another video.